These estimates, though, are way too high. The British and French throughout this time period always assume the Germans to be a lot stronger than they in reality actually are, and we're going to see why later. Now, in 1934, Germany begins to seriously rearm. Hitler tries to seize control of Austria, but is stopped when Mussolini moves Italian troops to the Brenner Pass. Germany signs a non-aggression pact, however, that year with Poland, starting to undermine the French series or system of alliances designed to contain the Germans. In April of 1935, you have the Strasser meeting. Britain, France and Italy announced their commitment to keeping Austria free. Those three great powers will stand by Austria against Germany. The French general Gamelin and the Italian general Badoglio begin military conversations designed for a joint war against the Germans. The French need Italy to help, not because of its armed forces, which, as we can see from the Second World War, actually performed incredibly badly, although no one was to know just how ineffective they were to be at this time. But the French really do need Italy so that they can have a realistic chance of helping their East European allies. Using Italian railways, French troops could be on the Danube in weeks. Italy's navy could also help protect the French Empire and would release a full 15 French divisions from the Franco-Italian border, which would then of course be free for combat along the German border. However, the Americans have already begun to appease Hitler. FDR's first action as president was to offer Germany the Polish corridor, as it's called, the bit of Poland, northern Poland along the coast around Danzig, that separates the two bits of Germany from each other at this time period, and also to offer to increase oil exports to Germany by 300%. The Americans now supply half of all of Germany's oil, and between 25 and 75% of their strategic raw materials, depending on what raw material you're looking at. The relations between the British and French are also really not good in this time period. A popular pamphlet was produced in France at this time calling for England to be reduced to slavery. But any hopes the French would have in a long war against the Germans would rest upon the British. The British equally dislike French politicians personally, but knew that they could not be seen to let France down, although they believed that the French had bullied the Germans throughout the 1920s. In May 1935, France and the USSR sign a mutual assistance pact. The Russians had offered a full military alliance with France, but the French had rejected it because the French army had a very low opinion of the Red Army. They didn't want a German-Soviet alliance, however, so they string Stalin along, making the talks go for as long as possible to stop the Russians starting to look elsewhere. The purge of the Red Army, however, when Stalin killed the bulk of the generals of the Red Army, including the military genius Tukhachevsky. When I was at university studying Soviet military doctrine, I was a huge admirer of Tukhachevsky. Look him up on Wikipedia. An absolute genius, but one who had gone out of his way to annoy Stalin before Stalin became ruler of Russia. We have the time, why not? What else am I going to do today? During the Russo-Polish War, the Russians were on the verge of victory against Poland. They were going to conquer Poland, and Tukhachevsky had this plan to end the war. He would lead a northern thrust around Warsaw to cross the river line and to swing in on Poland, to draw in the Polish army. And then the second wing of the Russian army, commanded by Voroshilov and Stalin, would, while this army was busy, would then hook along the left and would occupy Warsaw, encircle the Polish army, and win the war. Tukhachevsky's offensive opened brilliantly. It drew in the Polish army. And then Stalin and Voroshilov decided that the war was won, and so instead of completing the encirclement and destruction of the Polish army, He concentrated the army along the Hungarian border so that when the War with Poland was over, they could then start the invasion of Hungary. The Polish army withdrew troops facing that army and in one last desperate gamble hurled it against Tukhachevsky's men, and the united Polish army managed to drive Tukhachevsky's forces backward, leading to a stalemate in the war, and Poland survived. And Tukhachevsky publicly slapped Stalin and blamed him for the defeat. He was right to blame him for the defeat, but he was wrong to humiliate Stalin like that, because unbeknownst to Tukhachevsky, who obviously could not see the future, Stalin would come to rule the USSR and would remember that and would see to his death. And so the Red Army is purged of its officers. They break up the armoured forces that Tukhachevsky was a believer in massed concentrated tanks, in paratroopers, in a professional, elite, well-equipped army. Stalin killed all the officers in charge of these armoured formations and these paratroop formations, broke them all up, and instead scattered the tanks all across the infantry lines and broke up the paratroop formations to be used as front-line infantry. Militarily, a stupid decision, but for his own personal political power, a work of inspired genius, because Stalin was convinced that the Red Army under Tukhachevsky was going to make himself a new Napoleon and overthrow the revolution and introduce military rule. But in May 1935, the Franco-Russian military conversations end when Stalin starts to purge the Red Army. And then in October 1935, Italy invades the East African country of Abyssinia. Maybe because Laval, the French Prime Minister, had offered Mussolini a free hand in Africa. Certainly when Mussolini had asked the French whether he could do this, Laval had been very vague, but had probably thought that Mussolini could get what he wanted without resort to open war. The British, however, had not been consulted about this offer, and they are absolutely outraged, as was French public opinion. The French public opinion forced the French government to impose economic sanctions on Italy. However, crucially, the British and French failed to close the Suez Canal, which they owned, to Italian shipping, allowing Italian ships and troop transports to sail through the Suez Canal to go to East Africa to invade Abyssinia. They could have stopped them at any time. They also failed to impose, crucially, oil sanctions upon Italy, which again could have halted the war. Both did impose the embargo and the ban of arms sales, but not just to Italy, but on Abyssinia as well, and Abyssinia really needed to buy modern weapons. Laval's government fell in France to be replaced by a left-wing coalition that hated the fascist leader Mussolini. But the French government then acted incredibly childishly. From 1936 to 1938, the French would refuse to send an ambassador to Italy as a protest. That does not make any kind of conversation, when refusing to talk to them, easy. Relations would then worsen when Italy would help the fascists in the Spanish Civil War from July 1936 to April 1939.